Firstly, a little clarification and apology. After my last talk, I had a number of very brave and fantastic conversations with a couple of women who came and spoke to me and said, hey, when you were talking about Samson and lust and, you blokes are problematic, we get it, but you need to understand that that is not a unique experience to men. And thank you for coming and saying that, and they were very positive conversations, and I respect that. We're all around the campfire. We're all learning together. Sorry. Okay. I certainly didn't mean to minimise. This morning, if you want to follow along and just, fact check, always a good idea. We're pretty much going to be basing ourselves in Hebrews 11 through 12, as the musicians led us through, and honestly, I'm just wasting time after that. Okay, so we know, Hebrews 11 verse 31, Rahab welcomed the spies in peace, and then we go into Gideon, Barak, David, Samuel, they're all mentioned, and the suggestion is that contemporaneous Hebrew literature elevated these people, which is why the author is pointing to them. Whatever the specific background to their inclusion, there are lessons that we can take out of the various individuals, and hopefully we've got some of that already this week. Rahab. We're not defined by our past. We press towards the mark of the high calling of Jesus. We're not defined by our yesterdays, but rather by the next decision we make, and hopefully it's a decision of faith. Deborah, Jael, Barak. Our culture doesn't limit us. Faith is what defines us. And all of them broke through various restrictions their culture placed to demonstrate true faith and obedience to their God. We can't be held back. And also, if you remember, we touched on Col 3:14, the superglue of love, the bond of perfection. Col 3:14 is something which we need to slap around liberally in our lives. I first heard a brother say that, and he was the last person you'd expect. I was about 8 years old, and I still remember this guy on the platform thundering Col 3:14. It's just never left me. But it was a great point. We need that. Now, in Hebrews 11, we don't get mention of Deborah. We only have Barak mentioned, and that reflects the Hebrew literature of the time. Similarly, in 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul is going through listing out the witnesses to the resurrection, how can we be confident that Christ was raised? Because Christ appeared to Peter and James and the apostles, and then he appeared to 500 more, and they're all alive today. You can go and speak to them and check. He doesn't mention the fact that Christ also appeared first to the women, because in their society, a woman wasn't a reliable witness. Awkward. We're 2,000 years later, and we still have situations where we are culturally excluding and limiting the role and the witness of women. And we've all got a role to play in changing that narrative. Gideon, probably the least courageous warrior in the land, but God sees our potential, not our limitations. God gives us the evidence we need. And we talked about that cycle of faith, how we go through challenges and deconstruction and reconstruction. And actually it's part of us, God improving us really. Maybe some of our faults, maybe the way we, like a kid learns to ride a bike. You've got to fall off a few times to get better at riding a bike. And our Father knows that. Doubts are hard to carry, but the way we interact with each other makes a difference and can be a positive part of the development. And Samson, Samson's the character that hits me right in the feels. He found the weight of expectation heavier than the gates of Gath. He ultimately says, I don't feel like I'm within God's reach. I feel I'm too far gone. And we can feel like that. He felt he was part of the Philistines. And we saw he's going to get one wonderful surprise come resurrection day. I want to see the look on his mum's face. There's someone who needed the word yet. And she's going to see a boy right there. Poem. But the point of Hebrews 11 is not a celebration of faith, is it? Right? It's not what's the equivalent? It's not a team of the century. It's not an all-time greats. The point of Hebrews 11 is this is a list that's not finished yet. This is a list that encourages, that can include us. That's the point. It's not all-time greatest hits and now we're finished and gone. It's something that we can be included in. That's the point of the book. The list is still growing. Now, quickly, what is faith? Well, people regularly quote, for good reason, verse 1, faith is the assurance of... Oh, now I've lost it. That's bad, isn't it? Faith has been sure of what we hope for, being convinced of what we have not seen. It's changed translations, right? I still think half the time in the King James and half the time in the NET. It's personality. When I can't find a verse, I have to search on the King James language to find it. Still, it's a good thing. And look, I'm not here to bash the King James. It's a great stepping stone to the NET. We think about faith as being belief, okay? And that's true. Like, there's massive overlap in the definition of what it means. But there's a little bit more to the word faith, the Greek word pistis. And I don't know how many people, you don't have to put your hands up, are familiar with a book by a guy called Matthew Bates. He does a couple of podcasts and stuff. He's written a book that's called Salvation by Allegiance Alone. I know it's made its way into some parts of the community. Some people have read it. It's fantastic. Really good book just to perhaps rethink a little bit about faith and expand our understanding. And he uses some examples from contemporaneous literature, from the Maccabees, from Josephus, to demonstrate that this Greek word pistis, that we translate as faith, doesn't just mean belief. It also has this idea of loyalty, right? Of loyalty to a king. So the people in Hebrews 11, yes, they believe in God, but it's not just that. It's also a broader idea, one of loyalty through thick and thin. So, yeah, that's a book recommendation. I have a very strict budget as to how many of those I can give out. That's definitely one of them. Another thing, just as we speak about faith and book recommendations, I'll get them all done now. I'm sure a lot of us would have read it. David Levin's Legalism and Faith. Yeah, fantastic book. Definitely worth reading. He has a comment, page 124. Faith isn't faith unless it involves an element of the unknown. We must go beyond our comfort zone into that scary area called out of control, uncertainty. And in all of Hebrews 11, we've got people who were enduring uncertainty, who had things in their lives that were out of control, but they maintained loyalty to God. And that's what he wants from us. Maintain loyalty. Leave the rest to him. Now, we used to play this in the car, and when you're driving, it's really hard to do well in this game. You have got to remember a lot of faces. The context of the chapter defines the purpose. So, there's all different characters in chapter 11. That's where we're going with that, including lots of redheads. Just point that out for you. David was a good-looking young man who was ruddy. That means he had red hair. Just don't check on that fact. The context of the whole book of Hebrews, right? Really, really quickly, because I realised that, we have differing levels of familiarity with Scripture. So the book of Hebrews is written to a whole bunch of Jewish believers who had come out of Judaism. They'd accepted Christ, but they were getting pressure from friends and family to go back to synagogue. And there was a lot of pressure. And things were heating up. It was about to move from, come back to synagogue, son, to actual physical pressure, violence, intimidation. So things were heating up, people could tell. And so the writer of Hebrews, who's anonymous, he basically spends the first 10 chapters doing a theological explanation as to why the Old Testament was great, but Jesus was better. Jesus fulfills all of that. He doesn't use this analogy because, olden times, but all of the Old Testament is like the plans, the architectural drawings and designs for the house. But here you have your dream home constructed in Jesus. That's better. That's good. But all it is the architectural drawings. Jesus is the reality. Stick with that. It's a dream house that you can inhabit. None of you on the East Coast will understand that. Tasmanians and South Australians will. You're all stuck with the plans. Right? And then, having done the theological explanation, inhabit the house, he gets to Hebrews 10, verse 39. But we are not among those who shrink back and thus perish. We're amongst those who have faith and preserve their souls. Pressure and trouble is coming. So here in Hebrews 11 is a collection of people who come through, who don't pull back, And the point is, they're not different to you and I. We can see their weaknesses. We should never paper over their weaknesses and whitewash them. That's not the point. They have their weaknesses and they were made perfect in faith. It's not about being a hero of faith. We're made heroes by faith. We're not perfect. We're perfectible, just like them. That's what we have to cling on to. That's what we have to see. That's what they were too. So much no on one single slide, the prosperity gospel. It's a super popular because it's super appealing, right? I've written a book and you should all buy it. It will make me rich and you righteous. And if books are too hard, just send me money. No, seriously, just send me money. The first part of Hebrews 11 is a catalogue of faithful people, right? And they appear like things work for them. They have wins. You know, Abraham and Sarah, they have the miracle baby. Daniel's thrown into the lion's den and they don't eat him. You know, people fight back against armies of aliens, which is incredibly exciting, and new versions say armies of foreigners, which is nowhere near as exciting. As a kid, that was awesome. Modern translations, they ruin it for everyone. These people dealt with uncertainty and they dealt with heartache, but it all worked out for them. You know, they didn't get the ultimate promise, but it all worked out for them, right? And then the chapter takes a really dark, gritty turn. Verse 35. Two horrible words. But others, they were tortured, mocked, flogged, killed in inventive and cruel ways. They lived in caves. They died miserable, cold, alone in the dirt. They were faithful too. And the reason why he's saying this is because, unfortunately, that's going to be the experience of the people he's writing to, and that's, I'm not saying that you're going to die in the dirt, cold and alone. But faith is no airbag. It's not, a guaranteed easy ride. And he needed to tell people that in Hebrews 11. The point that it was going to hurt really was the important take-home message for them, and they needed to endure through that. And in reality, if you go through even the first half, no one gets an easy ride. Daniel appears there, faith shut the mouth of lions. So Daniel was thrown into the lion's den to be fed, but thankfully for him, they were having a stop work meeting complaining about the taste of vegetarians. So they left him alone. Vegetarians don't taste as good. Don't ask me how I know. Daniel didn't have an easy life though, despite that. He was dragged away from Jerusalem as a prisoner of war. And there's a prophecy in Isaiah 39 verse 7 where God had said to Hezekiah, your children, your grandchildren, descendants are going to be taken away and made eunuchs in Babylon. And that was normal procedure if you're in public service like Daniel was. Right? Daniel might have seen the mouth of lions stopped. Sounds fantastic. But actually he had a tremendous amount of trauma and hurt. Okay? Faith is no airbag. The prosperity gospel sounds so good, and there's quotes you can pull out wildly out of context that make it sound that way, and I think it's really dangerous for faith. Really dangerous, because it creates false expectation. There's this super popular fridge magnet Christianity quote, Jeremiah 29 verse 11. I know what I've planned for you, says the Lord. I have plans to prosper you, not to harm you. I have plans to give you a future filled with hope. The context, of course, is before all the good stuff, they were going to get dragged off to Babylon. People were going to get killed, raped, pillaged, murder, the whole 9 yards. If you read the context of Jeremiah 29, you wouldn't put it on your fridge. You'd probably keep it in the backyard. And the comments in Hebrews, as he goes on in verse 35, it's probably about recent history with the Maccabees and the like, which sadly we don't have time to drill into today because someone that's very dear to me would fall asleep. But the point is, I'm in trouble already. The point is that faith is no airbag. Even the people, even when we have wins, and we know this, right? When we have things in our lives and we go, God came through for me in that instance, but we'll be able to list off a whole handful of situations where things were tough. And faith requires us to endure through those, the good and the bad, and there will be bad. But the point is verse 40. God has provided something better for us. Seriously? I've gone that long already. God has provided something better for us. So Joshua, Aaron, Moses, the whole lot. We're going to be with all those faithful people together. Yeah, hopefully that works. Right. So the point isn't that the faithful win all the time. The point is rather that God will perfect us and that we can be part of that group. Now, how do we get through? Verse 1 and 2 of Hebrews 12. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, we must get rid of every weight and the sin that clings so closely and run with endurance the race set before us. And thank you again to the musos for pulling so much of this out this morning. We keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, the pioneer perfecter of our faith, who endured the cross, despised the shame, and has taken his seat at the throne of God. What's the point of surrounded by a cloud of great witnesses? We know, okay, so technically the word is used in Greek literature at the time of, a huge number of people surrounding. It's because we're encouraged by their example. What do they do for us? Well, they demonstrate with all their flaws that God can actually work in our lives, that God can actually take us from the winepress with Gideon, doubting, hedging our bets, to actually being a hero of faith. They demonstrate to us that the race is achievable. Has anyone actually, I'm sure, because you're all blinking so fit and healthy compared to me, how many people have participated in a public run, race, marathons are not fun so they don't count, bike rides, all of those things? Yeah, a number of people. Now, it's true, isn't it, that when you're running, and I did, believe it or not, I know it's not very believable, many years ago I did a 10K run, public event in Melbourne, and you're running along and you're just plodding, and you've got some complete random off to one side. You've never met them before, you'll never hear from them again, and they're like, yay, go you, you're fantastic. And you just, pick it up, and the chariots of fire is playing in your head. And there's 5,000 people in front of you, you're not fantastic. You're not even average. But cheering makes such a difference, doesn't it? From a complete random. Yeah. How much more difference when it's someone you know and love, right? Think of the power you've got. You don't even have to be intelligible. Go you! Makes a difference, right? It's unlikely you'll take a whole lot home from, the 5 studies, but take this. Just encourage the people around you. When you go back to your congregation, encourage those people, whatever they're doing. It makes an enormous difference as we run together. And if you haven't found a congregation or you're between congregations because you're not home yet, you know people that can do with encouragement too, right? We can all make a massive difference. If you can get me running like chariots of fire, you can do anything for other people, okay? But we can make a huge difference. And then he says, well, you've got to run unencumbered, right? And sinless. That's going to be a little tough. If you're an athlete, you've got to be dedicated, right? Let's be real. The only thing standing between me and a gold medal at the next Olympics is crab linguine and, a dark, inky, silky smooth Barossa Shiraz. Quite a few of them. Get rid of those and I'm all good to go. We make decisions that can make our lives harder or easier. Now, I can't tell you what you need to perhaps trim back on that's impeding your race a little, okay? Because what's going to slow you down might be quite different for me. You might not even like crab linguine. I'm sure there's therapists. We don't know. And we can be a little bit critical about other people's decisions when we perceive weights in their lives, the beams and the moat and the eye and all of that sort of thing. But we need to make hard choices sometimes. And I realise it's not very fashionable, but then neither am I. It's not very fashionable to talk about sin and holiness a whole lot. We prefer to talk about grace and love for good reason. That's the key, those two, grace and love. But we are called to be a chosen people, a priesthood. We are called to be Nazir, Nazarites dedicated to God. And that means there are some things that we need to make tough calls on in our life because they are going to trip us up. And take it for what it is. Sometimes if we're not aware of the struggle with sin, if we're not conscious of how we're having to pull back on some things and cut out other things, maybe it's time for a Rahab moment. Maybe it's time to dust off the running shoes and make a new decision about the new day. It's not all easy. They can be tough decisions. And we need to run with endurance. It means we need to keep running with patience. Now I can remember, it was a long weekend in 1993. I think it was October 1993. It makes a better story if it was. Sarah and I were sitting, just young kids at a young people's study weekend, and I think it was a night on, faithful people through the ages of play or something. It was great. And then after the night had finished, it was all done, good night, Wayne Levick burst up onto the platform with an announcement, or someone like him, and said, it's happening. It's happening. Now, Boris Yeltsin has dissolved the Russian parliament. Tanks are on their way into Moscow right at this minute. It's setting up. This is the king of the north. It's Ezekiel 38 all over again. Christ is seconds away. And everyone was just... I remember looking at Sarah going, right, okay, well, we're never going to get married, but awesome. 30 years ago. You might be someone for whom current events is a real buzz. I have a beautiful brother-in-law who is incredibly passionate about current events. It fires him up, and he's a wonderful, lovely, faithful brother. It doesn't do much for me. I think when we're told to go watch, it's not run down to the local Roman Forum and wait for Wi-Fi to be invented. It's actually about looking to our behaviour and our contribution to community. But if that works for you, cool. But not so much for me. We need to run with endurance, run with patience, in it for the long haul. We were chatting around the proverbial campfire a little while ago with some friends of ours. And one of them said, we need to expect Jesus to come at any moment, but we need to commit to the idea of dying a Christadelphian. I thought, do with that what you will. Right? And I'm not making any comments about those who've travelled around the sun many times. We need to commit to the long haul. Right? We're not going to get married, this is going to happen any second now. We're going to keep running with endurance. And how do we keep going? We get encouragement from our fellow runners, but it's the example of Christ primarily above all. When we see what he went through and we know that we have him at God's right hand, as he says in verse 2. He's at God's right hand, he's our advocate, he's our example, he's the one who's finished the race. And as he says, he authored our faith, and he will perfect it. He will finish it. He personally has done it and won the prize, but he's also going to take us there with him. It is one of the cruel tricks of life that chocolate cake is delicious and spinach is good for you. Character formation is the same, right? It's not all candles, cocoa, and people singing slightly out of tune. Our faith will be challenged, it'll be deconstructed, reconstructed. It'll emerge, perhaps better, with more uncertainty, but it's not a bad thing. Spinach is a bad thing. Spinach appears everywhere in my life. I sleep with my mouth shut because my wife would be poking it in. He goes on, she's so good, she cares for me, that's what she says. He goes on and he says in verse 5, 6 and 7, look, there's three basic ways you can respond to trial and trouble. There's three ways. We can respond with scorn. We can scorn the discipline of God. We can rage against God. We can walk outside and shout, why? I reckon pretty much everyone's done that. And there's plenty of Psalms where we have, I would say, permission to do that. We've got the example of Habakkuk, who has a full-on Barney with God and then stands up on the corner of the city wall with his arms crossed, holding his breath, waiting for an answer. We're allowed to do that, right? As long as we continue to move on from it. We can give up, we can fold in the towel, we can quit. And unfortunately, people do, and sometimes we feel like that. And the third thing we can do is learn. We can do a whole lot of one. Occasionally we do a bit of two. Hopefully, eventually, with patience, with love towards ourselves and each other, we get to number 3. We learn. Ecclesiastes 7 verse 2 says, it's better to go to a funeral than a feast because we all die and we need to learn. That sounds like fun. No, the book of Ecclesiastes says, if you're blessed with wealth and good food, enjoy it. If you have family, if you have a good relationship, enjoy it. All of those things are blessings from God. Enjoy it. We don't deny the good things in life, the chocolate cake, but from time to time we have to go to the funeral. We have to endure the tough times because that's how we grow and develop. And our Father knows best. We know that in the scheme of things. Now, most of us are parents. Many of us are parents. And if you're not a parent, you've got nieces and nephews, or you're part of a village that's raising children. All the teenagers are like, ugh. Okay, parents, does anyone want to debate the fact that the Institute for Teenage Inspection of Parental Quality Control exists and is real? Are there any better critics of parenting than teenagers, especially the oldest ones? And then they all graduate to tell you what you're doing wrong with the baby. So don't pretend you don't know what parenting is, because you've got plenty to say. But we learn, don't we? Like, you have a kid. Our first kid was born when I was 24, and discover the universal secret that no one tells you, that you got no idea. And the point he's making here in the passage, we all know from experience, most of us who've been parents, is it's absolutely true. It'd be far easier when the kid's been a monster just to throw some lollies on the floor, jump out, lock the door and drive away. And sometimes you feel like it, but you have to be the adult, right? You have to show love. And that means you've got to think about what's in the best interest of this little monster and apply discipline to get them to be the person that, the best that they can be. And that's when you're demonstrating an incredible amount of love and hard work, because you are past the pain that they might be inflicting on you to actually think of their best interests. Yeah, says the writer in Hebrews. And you need to take that thing and realise your Father in heaven is doing it. And just like the toddler, unable to understand why you're giving them spinach, not red lolly snakes, you're actually operating in the best interests. And your Father's doing that. You don't see it. You don't like it. It's not fun. It hurts. But there's a way of seeing it. Deborah walked by faith, not by sight. She didn't see, an impressive army underneath her and 6,000 blokes behind her with a couple of wooden tools and one blunt axe. She saw the representatives of Baal and Yahweh coming up from the south to win this victory. That's how she saw life, through the lens of faith. Not easy to do all the time, particularly when we're in pain. But if we can walk by faith, not by sight, that's the dream, the aspiration. To think and see these things differently. See them perhaps as God working to improve us. Not pain because he's given up on us, pain because he's still engaged. Hebrews 12 verse 11 says, all discipline seems painful at the time, not joyful. Later it produces the fruit of peace, righteousness for those trained by it, which is truly the worst thing you could say to someone who's currently going through trial. If you wanted the script for Job's 3 friends today, that would be a good starting point. But the writer is talking to people who are about to go through pain. They're not there yet, right? This is like the coach's speech before the game starts. You're going to go out there, they're going to tackle you, it's going to hurt, you just got to get up and keep going. Daniel, go cut more oranges. That's how the speech went for me, at least. When we aren't under fire, that's when we have to get ourselves ready, right? That's when we have to prepare. You know the parable of the 10 young women and the bridegroom without a watch? What did they have to do? They had to get oil, a super abundant amount of oil, more than you'd ever think was rationally necessary, so they could actually burn as lights when the time finally came. When we're in a settled space, we don't down tools. That's when we need to get ready. That's when we need to be preparing ourselves for the fire that's going to come. You don't practice the bushfire emergency plan in spring. Well, you don't now because of Murdoch. We're on fire during spring. You have to practice it when there's no smoke in the air, don't you? That's when you need to practice your bushfire plan. And we know, I know not everyone lives in this country, but you get the general gist, I'm sure. We know that bushfire, even if it's unbelievable at the time, ultimately leads to regeneration. In 2019, December 2019, there was incredible devastation through the Adelaide Hills. That was, our bushfire, biggest one of recent time. Burnt through an area we know really well, and we drove through a few days later after the fire was done. And, it's a moonscape. And the intensity of the heat was so much that actually all the microbial activity in the soil had been destroyed as well. People were really worried the soil would be barren. It's not just the plants that were destroyed. The soil had been destroyed as well, life taken out of it. 4 years later, driving through a few weekends ago, the place looks healthy. It's regenerated. We know that from our experience. Now, can you still see the impact of fire 4 years later? Yeah. Oh, there's still scars from the bushfires in our lives. The scars are very evident. And is the new growth, is it the same? Does the vegetation look the same 4, 5, 6 years later? No, it's different. There's life, there's new life, but it's different life. And that's with us too. Yeah. It's painful, but it produces a new life. It leaves scars. Yeah, you can't read that. As a teenager, I didn't think you would. As a teenager, I visited the Washington Holocaust Museum. That poem there says, "We are the shoes, we are the last witnesses. We are the shoes from grandchildren and grandfathers from Prague, Paris and Amsterdam. And because we're only made of fabric and leather and not of blood and flesh, each of us avoided the hellfire." The words hit me much harder than any of the gory details in that museum. I've read a few things, you've probably read more. I've not seen a convincing, complete answer to the question of pain and suffering, the question of evil. I wish I had an answer to give you. If I made something up, it might make you feel good for 3 months, and then suddenly it would all fall apart and you realised I was faking it. I think the answer's sitting somewhere in the answer that God gave Job. Job, everything is just far more complicated and far bigger than you understand right now. And it's really tough to accept that as an answer. But I think that's what it is. Sometimes pain and suffering and death. There was many of you may be aware, a few years ago they released wolves back into Yellowstone National Park. Right? Yeah, we're aware of that. And we know what happened? Yeah?
It gets better.
It got better. And I read the list, I went finding, because you read the popular thing, and then I went reading to try and find more detail. Beaver populations improved, trees improved, meadow grass improved, the fish populations improved, the elk that the things were preying on improved in their health. Even the amount of songbirds increased, right? It just went, all these things from just bringing time and chance, competition, suffering, death into that environment. Maybe our Father knows best. We might not be able to piece it together, but one day I'm sure we will. I struggle to understand. I have a very inconsistent view as to how God works in our lives. When I read Hebrews 11 and the miracle babies saved from lions, my kids are running 15 minutes late home. I'm literally praying, God, please bring them home safe. I don't know that that's how you operate, God. I hope it is. It's a weird prayer. I'm not sure. What I am very afraid of is how we interact with each other when we talk about providence. Because for some people, it's a really powerful thing that they feel, they believe, they've seen, they've felt, they've experienced. And I'm not going to argue any of that. I mean, we read scripture, and Jill and Ken sent me a text last night because I was like, I just don't get it, I just can't. And they just sent me about 5 words, and it was brilliant. Jesus was the Lamb of God. God's been through that pain and suffering. God cares. God understands. He cares about his children. You know, David in Psalm 56-ish, somewhere there, says, you know, like, you're collecting my tears in a bottle. You hear it. You feel it. All right? But we don't know who's at the conversation with us. I was at a men's weekend, Men with the Master, and we were talking. And there's some people who had some very lovely, very trusting, very open views of how providence works. And I was feeling uncomfortable. And I said, you know, I'm struggling with this, guys. I said, you know, my nephew, but my cousin, one of his sons was killed in a car accident just a couple of months prior, 21-year-old kid. And there was another brother at the table who'd been really quiet. And his niece died 20 years ago, been baptised for a couple of days, killed. We don't know who's at the table. We don't always know everyone's story. Key is how we treat each other and talk to them about suffering, how we talk to them about God's love. God's love is real. Is he active? Yeah. How? I don't know. Honestly, you know, I don't know how many of you know, hopefully none of you. Nick Cave sings this song, I don't believe in an interventionist God, but I know, darling, that you do. And, you know, bringing together that relationship and difference of belief. And sometimes I play both sides of the fence. I don't know. But we really need to show love to each other in it. The takeaway from Hebrews 11 and 12 is not about suffering. It's the time to stop. It's not about suffering. The writer wants us to get beyond that and get this point. The point is, verse 12 and 13, therefore, this is the point of the whole thing of, like, from the start of chapter 11 right till now, the point of everything I've said. Strengthen the listless hands and the weak knees. Lots of fun stuff in the quote, in the allusion back in Isaiah 35, which can link to 2 Chronicles 28, which can link to the parable of the Good Samaritan. We can talk about it afterwards. It's really cool, but it's not for now. Salvation is a joint exercise, right? We don't run solo. And our mission is to encourage each other, is to help each other down the road. And we've talked about the public events way out of order and all of that. We've got a fantastic culture in my meeting. One aspect of it, which I love, is that people will always come and say thank you. You know, thank you for playing the flute. Thank you, Daniel, for playing the triangle and keeping time most of the time. Thanks for doing the reading. Encouraging each other, thanking each other. It makes a huge difference. What is our mission? Make it easy for the person next to you. Encourage them down the road. Yeah, cool. The people next to you, close to you, are really good at just, you know, getting the under the fifth rib with the right words at the right time. You know who you are. Not allowed to say your name. Robert Owen's comment, it's common to put it now with the word mad, 200-300 years ago. All the world is queer, but the English language moves. Mad reflects his intention and the meaning a little more. Jesus' people shouldn't be limiting our encouragement and care. Everyone's inclined to define in-groups and out-groups, and sometimes, not uncommon, that we are harsher on groups that are similar to us but a little bit different than people who are far away. Classic sport, right? We're all harsher on Collingwood supporters than we are on people who follow horseshoe throwing. They need help, but we pick on the Collingwoods. Why? Because they're similar to us and we're reinforcing our identity as a member of Go My Local Sports Team, whatever that is. Okay? And the piece which just came in like a knife under the fifth rib was this. Daniel, are you more gracious and accepting of other Christian denominations than of some Christadelphians that you don't necessarily feel close to? Ouch. We shouldn't be defining anybody as mad or anybody as a little bit mad. And, okay, I can't speak to your experience. And this week's been pretty raw for a lot of us because there's a lot of trauma from a whole raft of different things. So I can only talk to myself, and I'm afraid you're going to have to do the work to draw links to you, okay? Some of the people who gave me grief, it was a tiny minority of people, and most of them in that tiny minority were only doing what they thought they had to do. They weren't motivated deliberately to hurt. They didn't feel like they had a choice with their faith construct and their understanding. I don't even know how to do it, to be honest. We've talked about healing and forgiveness. I don't quite know how to progress some of that, but I need to. I need to because it's the Jesus thing to do. Anyway, that's a painful takeaway for me from this week. Thank you. All of the stories, the characters that we've talked about, some that we've just touched on. As Paul said in Romans 15, they were written for our instruction. So through endurance and hope, we can continue. We can keep going in a life of faith. And in their lives, we see themes and ideas which can resonate with us, especially if we meet them where they are without our cultural expectations and demands. They're part of God's plan. They're part of God's people. And in grace, so are we. We might not have Abraham and Sarah as our literal parents. It doesn't matter. God, when he writes the list, will deem that this one, this one, this one, this one. We were all born there. We were all part of. As Peter wrote to his Gentile audience in 2 Peter 1 verse 4, God has bestowed upon us his great and precious promises, so that by means of what was promised, we may become partakers of the divine nature. We have a stake. We are part of the list in Hebrews 11 that is still being written. The winners, the sufferers, Jesus was with them, was with us through all the conflict. And we know that he will perfect us even as they were perfected. I want to conclude with perhaps a prayer. But it's really the words of Hebrews 13, verse 20 to 21. Now may you, the God of peace, who by the blood of the eternal covenant brought back from the dead the great shepherd of the sheep, our Lord Jesus Christ, may you please equip us with every good thing to do your will. Work in us what is pleasing before you, through Jesus Christ, to whom be glory forever. Amen.